Thaddeus. We had a dang Sedevacantist in here and he left. I wanted him to come on. That would have been a hoot. Thaddeus, what's up, dude?
Hey, Catholic here. I'm just interested to know what your main obstacle or argument against being a Catholic is.
The papacy has contradicted itself many times, as has Roman Catholic dogma.
Well, if I believe that, I would not be Catholic. So that is the essential reason for not being a Catholic. I have to see exactly what evidence you have for that. But
Well,
you're right.
do you want one example that I think is really strong?
Yeah.
As late as 1928, Mortalium Animos of Pius XI stated that to even have interreligious ceremonies with other, quote, Christian groups is a surrendering of the gospel and an action of apostasy. So I can't believe that a few decades later at Vatican II, the affirmation of the ecumenist movement as a movement of the Holy Spirit is now a good thing. That's a straight up contradiction.
That argument is similar to the arguments that the Sedevacantists have
So
against.
that's a fallacy. The fact that the argument comes from that person has nothing to do with whether it's true or
No,
false.
I'm just describing.
Well, we're all aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. I would say that if there's a teaching that was magisterially, there's different levels. I don't know how much you understand.
I understand. I bet I understand it more than you do.
Well, maybe you do. I understand that there are different levels of authority and different kinds of documents and
That's
kinds of statements. So an encyclical teaching, Mortalium Annus, is a high-level magisterial teaching. So if you're referring to an ecumenical movement or an action like John Paul II at Assisi, or are you talking about...
It won't matter and it won't even matter the status of that document, because the status of the document is irrelevant to whether the actions of the Pope reflect actions that are contrary to canon law and constitute actions of apostasy. So if it's always considered in Catholic theology and in moral theology that certain actions display an interstate of apostasy, the magisterial status of Mortalium Animos, which by the way I think you could easily argue is ordinary magisterium at the least, perhaps universal ordinary magisterium, should be protected by the charism of Peter, correct?
Should be. It's normative that Pope should act in accordance.
No. Their actions. No. The document is Mortalium Animos protected by Petrine charism or not?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
I mean,
it is.
If it's a magisterial teaching, then it.
No. Wait a minute. Now we're flipping it. Is Mortalium Animos protected by the Petrine charism from teaching error?
Encyclicals. It's an encyclical, I believe, right?
Correct.
Encyclicals are not acts of the extraordinary magisterium, like ex cathedra statements, but they're also not. I think they have the level of. I mean, they have a high level of. You're supposed to submit religious submission of intellectual will to encyclicals.
Correct.
Not every statement of
Right.
an encyclical is
Correct.
meant to teach universally. So there could be errors of fact or sociological opinion in encyclicals.
Okay. So is there any theological error in Mortalium Animos?
Well, I don't think there is. No, I mean, I don't see why I would think there is.
Okay. So it is in fact an action of apostasy to engage in interreligious dialogue and religious ceremonies, with Christians.
You would have to. We'd have to examine exactly. Well, listen.
That's the argument. That's the whole argument of that document, dude. Come on.
All right. If you're arguing that a pope, a bishop, or a clergy, or a lay Catholic, or anyone with authority, merely by the fact of disobeying a magisterial teaching,
No, nobody argued that.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you mentioned an ecumenical.
Again, I'm going to say that Mortalium Animos contradicts Vatican II. How's that? Nostra Aetate.
This is a great question. And so a couple of thoughts that initially come to mind would be, first of all, this is Pope Pius XI's decree there in his encyclical Mortalium Animos, which is on religious unity, is not a dogmatic definition. So this is not something that he's proposing as dogmatic. This is a disciplinary precept. So we're within the realm of discipline, which in virtue of the nature of a disciplinary precept is subject to modification. So that would be my first response. So even if we have a reversal of a discipline, just considered of itself, would in no way count against the Catholic understanding of the papacy and papal infallibility. So that would be my first response, because in essence, you have the Pope saying at one time, don't go to those meetings, and then at another time, the Pope saying, it's okay. Now, here's a second thought that I would entertain and think through with someone who poses this objection. What are the reasons why the Pope at that time, Pope Pius XI, would forbid Catholics from participating in these ceremonies? If those reasons are present there, but perhaps are no longer present in other settings, then you could see a plausible explanation as to why the prohibition would be lifted. So, for example, the Israelites, God's people, were prohibited from doing certain things, partaking of certain foods, prohibited from certain activities that pagans engaged in because of the historical circumstances at the time. But those prohibitions are lifted due to the tendencies of God's people to fall into paganism is no longer present. I'm even thinking of the Catholic understanding of cremation, right? So at some point in time, the church forbade cremation because of what it might lead Catholics to believe, but because that problem and that potential problem is no longer present, the church permits cremation. So in this case, it could possibly be, and as you know, if my memory serves me correctly, Pope Pius XI was viewing non-Catholic Protestant religious ceremonies as involving very anti-Catholic preaching and an aggressive approach to Catholicism. And so given his judgment that that's what's going on in those religious ceremonies, he can reasonably judge and prohibit the Catholic faithful from participating in those religious ceremonies given the danger to their faith. That's perfectly reasonable. And I'm sympathetic to that. But given our current circumstances, we have some religious ceremonies where you have even Protestant groups who are not as anti-Catholic, preaching a sort of a mere Christianity. And whenever there is no danger of faith and nothing there that could lead a Catholic to reject the Catholic faith, then you can see at least reasonably why a pope would lift that prohibition and allow for Catholics to go. And so we have consistency there. And here's a third thought or response that comes to mind, Justice. Notice here you have a pope making a judgment of fact. Those ceremonies are anti-Catholic. That sort of judgment, notice the theology, anti-Catholic theology is bad. That's going to be part of teaching, papal teaching, church teaching. But here, Pius XI would be making the judgment that bad theology is present in this concrete circumstance, in that religious ceremony. Well, that, Justice, we do not believe as Catholics that that's protected by the charism of infallibility. Here's an analogy. The Pope would be protected by the charism of infallibility with definitive teaching concerning the principles of just war theory. But the Pope is not protected by the charism of infallibility when he makes a judgment that particular concrete war is just or not just. He can make a mistake in that. And so similarly here, you have Pope Pius XI making a judgment about a concrete fact of whether anti-Catholic theology is present in certain religious ceremonies. Now, it may very well have been the case, but what my point here is that sort of judgment in no way would be protected by the charism of infallibility and, of course, could be subject to change given different historical circumstances regarding those religious ceremonies. That's what I would say to that.